On December 31st, 2000, a grandmother arrived at her daughter's home in Tokyo to help prepare for New Year's celebrations and discovered 4 members of her family murdered in a crime scene containing more forensic evidence than detectives had ever seen 25 years later. Despite DNA, fingerprints, clothing fibers, and digital footprints, no one has ever been arrested. Setagaya is one of Tokyo's 23 special wards, a residential area where narrow streets wind between traditional wooden homes and modern apartment buildings. In the year 2000, the neighborhood still had pockets of old Tokyo, houses with small gardens, families who'd lived on the same street for generations. December in Tokyo is cold and dry, the air sharp, the city preparing for Omisoka, New Year's Eve, the most important holiday of the Japanese calendar. Families clean their homes thoroughly, prepare special foods, ready themselves for the fresh start that comes with the new year. For the Miyazawa family living in their 2-story home in Setagaya, December 30th should have been a day of preparation and anticipation. Instead, it became the day their lives ended. Mikio Miyazawa was 44 years old in December 2000, working in the marketing department of a prominent Japanese company. Those who knew him described him as diligent, quiet, someone who took his responsibilities seriously, both at work and at home. His wife Yasuko, 41, had recently been focusing on raising their 2 children, while also helping care for her elderly mother who lived nearby. Their daughter Niina was 8 years old, in 3rd grade, the kind of student teachers praised for her attentiveness and kindness to classmates. Their son Ray was 6, in 1st grade, still carrying the enthusiasm unique to young children who find everything interesting. The Miyazawa home sat in a residential area that was quietly transitioning. The neighborhood had once been filled with similar houses, but redevelopment was creeping in. A small public park had recently been built directly behind the Miyazawa property, separated only by a fence. This park became a source of minor tension. The family had expressed concerns about noise and privacy, the reality of living next to a public space where anyone could gather at any time. December 30th was a Saturday. Mikio had come home from work. Yasuko was managing household tasks. The children were on winter break from school. It was an ordinary day, the kind that blends into memory without distinction, except for what came after. That evening, the family went about their usual routines: dinner, baths, the children heading to bed, Mikio working late into the night, as he often did, at the computer in the 2nd-floor room. Sometime between 11:30 p.m. on December 30th and early morning on December 31st, someone entered the Miyazawa home. What investigators would later determine was this: the intruder entered through a 2nd-floor bathroom window, accessible from the small park behind the house. Once inside, the attack began with Niina, who was in a 2nd-floor bedroom. The medical examiner would determine she died from stab wounds. Mikio, hearing something, came to investigate. He confronted the intruder on the stairs. The two fought, violently, Mikio sustaining defensive wounds that showed he'd tried to protect his family. He was stabbed multiple times and died on the staircase. Yasuko and 6-year-old Ray were killed in a 1st-floor bedroom. The brutality of the attack was matched by its speed. Investigators estimated the murders took less than 30 minutes. And then, inexplicably, the killer stayed. For hours. In the house with 4 dead bodies, the intruder ate food from the refrigerator, used the toilet, spent time on the family computer. The computer logs would later show internet activity throughout the night. The killer rested, possibly even slept, changed clothes, leaving behind his own used towels, moved through the house as though it were his own space. Then, sometime before dawn, he left the way he'd entered, through the bathroom window, vanishing into the Tokyo morning. On December 31st, around 10:45 a.m., Yasuko's mother arrived at the house. She'd planned to help prepare New Year's food with her daughter, a tradition they'd maintained for years. When no one answered the door, she used her key. What she found in the next few minutes would haunt her for the rest of her life. She discovered her daughter, her son-in-law, her 2 grandchildren. She called the police. By 11 a.m., the Setagaya crime scene had become the focus of what would evolve into one of Japan's largest unsolved murder investigations. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police responded with immediate force. The brutality of the crime, the death of 2 children, the seemingly motiveless nature of the attack, all of it demanded every resource the department could marshal. Lead investigator Tsutomu Katsumata arrived at the scene and immediately recognized they were dealing with something unusual. The crime scene wasn't just violent, it was weird. Most murderers flee crime scenes as quickly as possible. They're operating on adrenaline, fear, the desperate need to escape. But this killer had stayed for hours. The evidence of his presence was everywhere. He'd eaten 4 ice cream cups from the refrigerator. He'd used the toilet and left his DNA. He'd changed into Mikio's clothing and left his own garments behind. He'd spent time on the computer, logging into Dragon Quest, an online game, checking theatrical showtimes. He'd used tissues and towels. He'd moved items around the house. From an investigative standpoint, it was unprecedented. Crime scenes usually yield fragments of evidence that detectives have to piece together carefully, but this scene was saturated with evidence. Fingerprints, DNA from multiple sources, clothing items, digital footprints. It should have been solved within weeks. The killer had left behind a hip bag, a black jacket, a hat, shoes, a handkerchief. The clothing items were carefully analyzed. The hip bag was identified as being from a U.S. military base, a specific type sold at exchanges. The jacket was from a brand sold in Korea and other parts of Asia, but not commonly in Japan. The shoes were Slazenger, a brand more popular outside Japan. Even the handkerchief bore a logo from a theater in the Kansai region, hundreds of kilometers from Tokyo. The forensic analysis revealed something remarkable about the sand particles found on the shoes and clothing. Japanese forensic scientists analyzed the mineral composition and determined the sand came from the American Southwest, likely California or Nevada. The combination of evidence suggested someone with connections to U.S. military bases, someone who'd traveled internationally, someone who wasn't from the immediate Tokyo area. The DNA profile was particularly interesting. In 2000, DNA technology was advancing rapidly, but still had limitations. The killer's DNA showed he was male, likely of mixed ancestry. Possibly East Asian and European scientists even attempted rudimentary DNA phenotyping to create a sketch of what he might look like. Young, in his late teens or early 20s based on the profile, possibly mixed heritage. But here's where the investigation hit its first major wall. The DNA didn't match anyone in Japan's criminal database. Interpol was contacted. The DNA was compared against databases in the United States, South Korea, other countries. Nothing. The fingerprints didn't match any known individual. The extensive evidence, instead of pointing to a specific person, pointed to a ghost. The theory that emerged was that the killer was young, possibly connected to U.S. military installations through family, someone who'd traveled between Japan, Korea, and the United States. The clothing suggested someone familiar with American products. The computer usage suggested someone comfortable with technology. The decision to stay at the crime scene for hours suggested either incredible boldness or a profound disconnection from normal fear responses. Public response in Japan was intense. The murder of an entire family, including young children, in their own home, shattered the sense of safety many Japanese people felt. The Setagaya ward saw security measures increase dramatically. Home security systems, once uncommon in Japan, became more popular. The case was covered exhaustively in Japanese media, with the police releasing regular updates. As the investigation extended from weeks into months, then years, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police maintained an unprecedented level of commitment. A special task force was established specifically for this case. At its peak, more than 200 investigators were working on leads. Every piece of clothing was traced back to its manufacturer. Every sand particle was analyzed again and again. The DNA was compared against new databases as they came online. The international cooperation aspect was particularly challenging. In 2000 and the years immediately following, international law enforcement coordination wasn't as streamlined as it would later become. Getting access to DNA databases from other countries required complex diplomatic and legal processes. The U.S. military, while cooperative, had limitations on what information they could share about personnel and families. Investigators followed countless leads. Tips poured in from across Japan and internationally. People reported suspicious behavior. Others confessed falsely, seeking attention. Each lead had to be investigated, verified, and usually eliminated. The task force interviewed thousands of people. They looked at everyone who'd been in the area that night. They investigated construction workers who'd been building in the neighborhood. They examined relationships Mikio or Yasuko might have had that could suggest motive. One investigative avenue focused on the park. Had someone been watching the family from the park? Had there been altercations about noise or property that escalated? Detectives spent months interviewing everyone who regularly used that park, looking for someone who might have developed an obsession or grievance. The digital evidence from the computer became a crucial focus. The killer had spent considerable time online, and every click, every search, every website visit was documented. He'd looked at information about Shiki Theater Company, a major Japanese theatrical troupe. This connected to the handkerchief he'd left behind bearing the same theater company's logo he'd played Dragon Quest. He'd browsed various websites. Investigators tried to trace the online activity to determine if the killer had logged into any personal accounts, but he'd only used the family's existing logins. It was as if he'd been killing time, literally, waiting for something, or simply occupying himself in the hours after committing mass murder. The behavioral analysis was perplexing. Profilers suggested the extended stay at the scene indicated either someone with military or martial arts training who had unusual comfort with violent situations, or someone with significant psychological abnormalities who didn't process fear and risk normally. The mixed possibility that he might have dozed or rested after the murders suggested someone whose response to extreme stress was dramatically different from typical patterns. As DNA technology advanced through the 2000s and 20s, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police regularly reanalyzed the evidence with new techniques. They created updated facial reconstructions based on DNA phenotyping as that science improved. They compared the DNA against newer databases. In 2019, they announced they'd narrowed down the possible ancestry even further and had created new composite images of what the suspect might look like. But still, no match, no arrest. The case remained unsolved, becoming Japan's most famous modern mystery. As of 2025, the Setagaya case remains open. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police maintain a dedicated team working exclusively on this investigation. The official reward for information has been increased multiple times and currently stands at 20 million yen. Every year on the anniversary, police conduct awareness campaigns, hoping new information will surface. The house where the murders occurred was eventually demolished, but a small memorial stands in the area. Yasuko's mother, now in her 90s, continues to wait for answers about who killed her family and why. The Setagaya case represents something that haunts investigators worldwide. The case where evidence abundance doesn't equal resolution. Modern forensic science promises us that DNA, fingerprints, digital footprints will solve crimes, and usually they do. But this case has every piece of evidence you could want and has yielded no answers for 25 years. The theories persist. Was it a young person connected to U.S. military bases who left Japan before police realized the significance of the evidence? Was it someone with enough money or connections to evade international law enforcement? Or is the killer still in Japan, living an ordinary life, knowing that without a direct comparison, his DNA in a database means nothing? Here's what I'm curious about. With this much evidence, what do you think prevented this case from being solved? Bad timing with the technology? International jurisdiction issues? Or something else? I'd genuinely like to hear your theories in the comments. This is part of the Deadly New Beginnings series, cases where the timing around New Year held special significance. If you're interested in more international cases where the investigation itself becomes part of the mystery, subscribe. New episodes drop 3 times a week. This has been Umbra Cases.